Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shaper Sessions. My name is Jake. I'm here at Shaper HQ, and I'm also joined by my colleague Sean. Say hi, Sean.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are going to focus on a very exciting project that we just recently launched, a premium project called the Stock Chair from Jonas Winkler. Um, we're going to go through pretty much the whole process, talk about the milling process, the layout, which is by far one of the most important things about this chair is just the layout and how you use Workstation to achieve uh, perfect joints, flat seams all over the chair. Um, so let's get started. First and foremost, the reason it's called the stock chair. Well, because it's all based around the stock that you're using to make it. The dimensions of your stock are really important. The um, consistency of your thicknesses and width is very important. And although it may seem like a simple chair, there's a lot of nuances to it to make it perfect that we're going to focus on today and talk about. So, as I said, we're going to go through the prep, the layout, the joinery, which is the Morrison tenon, the glue up, and the finish, and of course the beautiful woven seat. So, in milling, starting from, say, rough lumber, getting to very tight dimensioned stock that the whole chair is built around. In the Imperial version, we're working with 1 1/8 thick by 1.5 wide stock. I have some walnut here today that I'll be using. But just to kind of go a little deeper into it, Sean, you want to show just the difference between, what is rough stock versus dimension stock?
Yeah, let me grab this here. So, when we're talking about kind of rough stock, this is essentially a tree. It's not flat. It's not angled, parallel. You're not going to be able to make a chair with this. So we're going to go through a bunch of process to get this into a very standardized style. That way we can build with 90-degree angles. That's going to make the stock chair kind of shine. And what's really cool about this whole project is once you get this milling down pat, if you're new to milling, you're going to learn a lot about that. And once you do, like, you're going to find Workstation and Origin can actually speed up and really take your furniture to the next level. So Jake, I think, has done a lot of this already, and we did a little bit of live streaming on Instagram yesterday where we showed some of the process. But yeah, maybe Jake can take it over to kind of where we're leaving off with the milling process.
Sure. So if you've purchased the project yet, you'll know that to kind of break things down a little easier, we divide a long board of stock down into 3 sections. Those 3 sections is just going to make the milling process a little easier when we're going across our joiner to get a flat face, then to our planer to get the proper thickness, and then to our table saw to get a proper width, and then miter saw to get our length. Each piece, instead of measuring every single time, we're going to measure once, set a stop to make sure that we're getting repeatable lengths and repeatable widths. That's the most important thing about this chair. It can kind of be, well, you should follow the dimensions though that we give you, but the most important thing is consistency. As long as all your pieces are the same, that are supposed to be the same, it's going to work out in the end. So, how do we do that? For one, when I am going through my planing process and getting down to thickness, I have my 3 boards. I have a pair of calipers right next to me, and I'm checking every single pass. I'm checking that thickness and creeping up on that 1 1/8 thickness. And once I'm sending all three boards through to make sure that, again, they're all consistently the same thickness. And same thing for the table saw. So when we move over to the table saw, I'll typically do my first pass just a hair over 1.5 inches, measure that width with calipers, dial in my fence just to make sure that once I make another pass, it's exactly 1.5 inches. Then I know that every pass I do after that is going to be exactly 1.5 inches by 1 1/8 inches. And for the miter saw, if your miter saw doesn't have a stop, that's built into it, um, a clamp block or just a piece of wood and a clamp holding onto the rail, just so that you can measure one length once, cut it, butt it up against that, and so every time when you're switching it out, you're just using a physical measurement rather than a pencil mark, and the variability that can happen there. So after
even there, if you don't have a miter saw, there's an option to use a crosscut sled on the table saw. Some people are a little more feel better about that, or they don't have a miter saw that gets good tolerances, so that's another option as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say though, a miter saw, an adjustable angle miter saw is really important for this project, because down the road we take the back leg and we actually cut an angle, so that's where the backrest attaches to. And in the project we actually make a jig on workstation out of some MDF and a hold down clamp to actually go to your miter saw with. But anyways, that's the prep, that's the milling process. Most important things, consistency, as through the rest of the project, as you will see. So we can move on to the next part. Oh, let's do this. What do you get when you buy it? What does it actually look like when you have made the purchase of the stock chair or any premium project? What does it all come with? This is the project dashboard, and we have not only the project instructions, which we have worked very hard on in both metric and imperial measurements. You can check out your project bill of materials. So before you get going, you can run through that, make your orders, go to the store, pick up what you need before you start the project. You have your 2D cutting files. We have your 2D cutting files, as well as some 3D design files. So if you want to see it, if you want to see the 3D design files, you can access them there. And technical drawings. So the technical drawings dive a little deeper into, well, more just lay out exactly what the chair is all about. The sizes, the width, the height, and the naming convention. This chair has a lot of specifics on each part, has a letter name. We want to reference faces, so if at any point you get confused, refer back to that technical document just to get kind of an overall view of what we're talking about when we say reference faces. But yeah,
Jake, it may be worth going back to the instructions for a quick second, just to walk through those. For people who may have not seen premium projects, one of the really key parts of it is this step-by-step instructions, where you can see what you need for each step. There's an illustration that walks you through the process, kind of all the way from start to finish. So even though we're going over kind of the high-level notes here in the session, when you purchase the project and it becomes part of your ShaperHub files, you're going to get 71 steps that walk you through the entire process of how to put this chair together, both in kind of the milling and kind of organizing your files, and then all the way through to what cut settings you're going to use per step and how deep you need to cut things. So you can kind of walk yourself through this as you're using it. If you need to stop for the night, when you come back, it'll know what step you're on. So it's quite a nice way to walk yourself through the process and learn these things. And then if you build the chair multiple times, you have this to walk through, and all premium projects come with these instructions. So it's a really great way to learn Origin, as well as kind of how to build projects with Origin and Workstation.
Yeah, we definitely design these around learning experiences. So if you're, we have projects that are on the simpler side. If you're just starting with Origin, kind of get you up and running, get you familiar with all the functions of the tool with Workstation, to more complicated projects like the shop stool or the stock chair, things like that, that will teach you even more. One of my favorite learning points of the stock chair is it teaches you how to use the right and left side of the workstation, because we're going to be probing off both sides, different styles of grids, some gridding techniques that you might not have thought to use before. Okay, let's hop into the most important part, the layout of the chair. So if you hop over to my overhead camera, please. After I've milled my material and I've cut it to length, what I do is I lay it out in this fashion. I have my back legs here, my front legs, and my 2 short stretchers. Once it's in this orientation, we're going to mark our reference faces. It just makes it easier when we move to our workstation and we're cutting our tenons to be using the same face. What exactly do I mean when I say that? These faces are going to align. So we want to reference these faces when we're cutting the joinery so that when they actually come to assemble, they're all going to be nice and tight and flush and look good. It's also a style in which it takes the maybe subtle variations in thicknesses and material stock. It kind of gets rid of that, and I'll go into that more when we start throwing material onto the workstation. But in this layout, we have our part naming convention, which is going to help later on when you're cutting the mortise files. So A, B, E, and F for the legs. Each file has that letter in it, so you know when you're placing your next file, you say, okay, I'm going to place letter A because I'm cutting leg A, and whether it's a right or left probe. So keep in mind too when you're drawing all this out on your material, draw it lightly. You're just going to have to sand it off later, but it really is important. So in addition to the letter naming convention, you're going to throw X's on your reference faces. That X means that's the face that's going against your workstation. So that clamping face on your workstation, every single time that X is what's pressed up against it. That way, as we go through each part, we know we're referencing the same face every time. And then an additional thing that I liked that I did that I thought helped a lot was just put a small circle where your mortises are going to end up. Just a small circle just in the general area, and that's just going to help when you're going to the workstation, clear up any confusion. Just be like, okay, I know my mortise is going to be roughly here, so that's my side facing up.
Yeah, that's going to show up when you make your scan on workstation in maybe not a perfect way, but at least you're going to see a rough idea of where that mortise should be, and that will help you as you're working through this project.
Yeah. So don't skip the layout part. All right. So as you can probably see, I've gone through and cut most of my joinery already, but we're going to walk through both a set of tenons and a leg of mortises. So this is one of my long stretchers. I have piece I here in my hand. You can see there on the left hand side we have 4 short stretchers and 2 long stretchers. Those are the front and back stretchers. And each stretcher obviously has 2 tenons, but we're going to cut them in 2 separate steps. All of the left probe tenons we're going to cut all at once, and then we're going to move over to the right side of the workstation and cut all the right probe tenons. Now, why do we do that? Again, we're using that same reference face. That part that we drew the X on, that's always against the workstation surface, and our registration pins, our vertical alignment pins, we want to be using those on the same face as well. So if I'm going on the left side, they're touching this surface. So when I want to cut this tenon, we're spinning it like that again. So we're referencing those vertical alignment pins and still this face on the workstation. It's going to get you the most consistent joints, and when it comes to assembly, it's going to save you a lot of time in sanding because everything's going to come together really nicely. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe one thing to quickly talk about here, Jake, is why we're spending so much time on the references, because I think some people may not quite understand, but it really comes down to material preparation. If your stock isn't perfectly consistent, when you flip that face to reference off the other side, your location is going to be a little bit off. And if you do that a bunch of times, you're going to have a chair that has little offsets that are not necessarily from origin, but from the stock being kind of variable thickness. Even after you cut it on a table saw, there may be some movement. The planing, is going to kind of release some stresses from the wood, and it may move on you. So it's really important to say, I want all the outside pieces of the chair to align perfectly. And if it moves, I want it to move on the inside, or, really depending on whatever kind of project you're working on, you want to think about that. In certain cases, you don't have to think about the faces as much, and you can just kind of put tenon in the workstation over and over without really thinking too much. But in this case, because of all the outside joinery that's connecting, we put a lot of effort into making sure that when you assemble this, the outside of the chair is going to have that perfectly alignment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, starting with one of my long stretchers, I have my X face, and we're moving to the workstation. First step is we're going to take that support bar, we're going to put it into its zeroing position, lock it down up top, double checking X is going against the clamping face, and you can see I have my vertical alignment pins extended here and here. Press firmly up against the vertical alignment pins and straight up against the support bar, so we're getting a nice square registration, and tighten your clamps. You may notice that I'm using the sliding F-style clamp, and for those of you that have Workstation and didn't know that you can also use these style clamps, it really depends on the application. Sometimes these are great, sometimes the toggle clamps that come with the Workstation are great. It all depends on what your project asks for. Okay.
Yeah, and so you can see that maybe if people haven't seen the workstation before, the bar that kind of goes in workstation also acts as kind of an in stop when you're putting in tenons to allow you to get a perfect quick reference off the top that's totally flat with the tape. And that's one of the kind of things you need to think about when you're working on Origin, is having the top of your surface flat with tape. And this is kind of a built-in part of Workstation to quickly align. So you just pop that piece off, stick it on top, put your tenon in, and then you put it back to use as a kind of support bar for Origin. So
really handy, especially in combination with the sliding shelf, to just cut odd thickness material. As if you've used Origin before, you know that having the same thickness tape board out in front of you is really important as the material you're cutting. So for smaller projects like this, or like the pen holder premium project, for example, it's the perfect thing to put on the shelf. Depending on whatever thickness your material is, you come right up to the support bar and you can work with a variety of thicknesses. Okay, so I am going to pop my spoil board out temporarily. And this is what I was talking about earlier. The gridding process is a little new. We're going to grid behind our stock this time around. So I'm going to start with a scan. Get a nice clean image of my tenon. And I encourage you to rename your workspaces or name your workspaces after you do something like this. And you can access that back in the scan menu right there. Rename, and I would call this stock chair left tenon. Now if I decide to make this chair later on, again, I already have a workspace set up for it, and all I need to do is press it up against my vertical alignment pins, and I'm ready to go. Okay, there's the top of my material. We're going to do a grid, but first, and always with best practices, I'm going to throw my engraving bit in there upside down. I like to do that because it gives me the solid 1/4 inch probe, so that I know when I'm creating my grid, especially if I'm just doing one grid and it's setting me up for a bunch of tenons, I'm going to take the extra second to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. That can just be hand tight, but you still should tighten the spindle screw. Okay. Doesn't necessarily matter what size the grid is, but it does matter where we're placing the points. New grid, lower that down. And if you can see on my screen, it's a little difficult, but I'm coming in that void where I took the spoil board out. That's where I'm lowering the bit down into, that little space. I'm going to use this controller down there to toggle which side of the bit I want to use as the probe. Press against the back side of my material, or rather the reference face of my stock. Probe, probe, come around to that left side. Probe.
These are very light touches. You don't need to push into it. You just want to kind of very softly touch the bit to the material.
Yeah. Okay. Now my 0, 0 point is right there at the top left of my material. So it's the face pressed against the workstation, which means no matter how thick my material is, if it's just slightly off, it's going to be okay. And it doesn't necessarily matter what size the grid is because we have a tenon file that we're going to place right at 0, 0 using the top left anchor point. Before I do that, I'm going to pop my spoil board back in, make sure that it's properly tensioned. Again, be really gentle with these tensioning cams, because I don't want to pull the material away if I over tighten it. I just want it to be snug enough so that it doesn't kick around and it's actually supporting the back end of my material for chip out. And put my 1/4 inch cutter back in.
Yeah, and maybe while you're doing that, Jake, I'll quickly talk about one cool thing. So with Workstation, now that we have the grid placed in the back corner, if we wanted, we could save this kind of workspace as maybe a template for Workstation. And if we're using that same mechanism, the 2 pins and the back face for another project, it doesn't matter if our stock grows or gets bigger, we can kind of pull that workspace up, copy it, duplicate it, and then actually we don't have to do gridding for future projects if we decide that things aren't moving. So Workstation's built to be kind of repeatable and fixture like that. So if we come back a month later, we can put this in, load up that file, and even if our stock changes, we can load that workspace up, kind of delete the files that are associated with that, and then add our new file without having to regrid. So that can save you some time as a pro tip. And then, just make sure you're naming your files correctly so that you can recall them later. Maybe, Jake, after we get done this, you can go in and kind of show how to search for all the workspaces we're going to create during this session.
Yeah.
And how to recall them, and even how to kind of modify one with add to scan. So that's a cool little thing we can go over.
Absolutely. Okay, I went ahead and Z-touched directly off the top of my material. And I'm going to place my tenon file now. So go into design. I'm just going to back up for a sec and show when you open your Shaper Hub on your tool, you have your origin files and you also have your premium list once you start purchasing premium projects. So you go in there and you can see there's my stock chair, and I want the Imperial cut files, and there are all my cut files ready to go.
And if people don't know, the Candle Holder project is a free project that you can get a taste of premium projects. All you have to do is kind of walk through the purchase thing, but it is a free project that you can get a feel for how these projects work. And it's a pretty fun one that you can crank out projects and gifts for friends.
Yeah, that's a perfect one. Gets you kind of familiar with how we put together premium projects and the time and energy that we put into them to make them beautiful and educational. Okay, as you see, I'm grabbing my top left anchor point, and again, that's where my 0, 0 point is. X and Y readout 0, 0. Go ahead and place that there. So for the cutting of these tenons, we're going a route of working from the outside in. So we're going to use our offset feature. We're going to bump that way out to about 3.5. The reason we do that is because now you can see the cut path actually will get the very corner of my material. So I'm going to do 2 depth passes all the way out here, and our final depth is 0.625. Then I'm going to work my way in, again, using offsets from 0.35 to 0.15, 0.02, 0. Cutting all my tendons to 0. And you'll notice it is a lot of material, but because I'm using the full length of the cutting flute of the bit and I'm cutting into end grain, it's going to cut like butter and produce really nice shavings versus cutting into cross grain, which is a little different. So, put my glasses on here, and I'm going to run through this process.
So if you're used to the way we talk about cutting with Origin, normally what we suggest is cutting the depth of the bit. So if you have a 1/4 inch diameter bit, you can cut a 1/4 inch per pass. And what's good about doing tenons on Origin is you can actually cut with a lot more of the flute. So what Jake's going to do is he's still going to do his roughly 1/4 inch depth per pass. Right now he's doing a little bit more, and as you get more familiar with Origin, you can kind of decide your level of comfort with how deep you can go. But typically we say, around the same diameter as your depth, right? So in this case, he's going down, he'd go down at 1/4 inch bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually start, once we get down to the full depth, instead of doing, kind of each pass with each offset and then go down to the next depth, we're going to go full down to our depth with the outside of this tenon. And then we're going to work our way in. So here you can see now he's taking about 3/4, maybe 75% of his bit diameter, and he's actually just clearing that material out. And so we're going to keep offsetting until we get to 0. And there's a couple nice things about this. One, you're using a lot more of the bit to remove material. Typically, you're only cutting with the bottom 1/4 inch of a bit. Here, we're using a lot of the flute to cut. So if you have old bits that are kind of getting a little dull, they're going to be sharp up high. So this is kind of one of the places where I kind of keep old bits around sometimes just to have that ability to use them in tenon. But normally the bottom 1/4 of your bit gets burned or dulled. And in tenon case, you can use the entire kind of flute of the bit. And you can kind of see the chips that are flying here. Like, we're getting pretty good sized chips, and you want that. You don't want to be creating dust. You want nice chips coming off. And all these ones that are flying around underneath are really a nice size that you're kind of looking for. You have to work with your speeds to get the right size there.
Yep. Yeah, I love using the length of the cutter because, as you just said, the chips that come out, these nice little spirals, is just very satisfying.
Well, and not only that, but you don't have to, change your offset and change your depth each time. You're just getting your depth down to full depth and then changing the offset each pass, which can be a lot faster.
Correct. All right. So there you go. There is my tenon.
Looking pretty good.
And now, while I have it in this position and on this camera, again, we just cut it like this. We're not going to rotate it. We're going to use that same reference face. We're just going to spin it and move to the right side. So let me get that clamped up on the right side. And let's just do this very steadily.
In like here, Jake's actually doing a kind of a side flip to kind of make sure that face is still the one touching the clamping face on Workstation. But like I said, there are a lot of other projects that don't require this. This is kind of unique to the stock chair, and in a lot of cases, we would just use the same edge and flip to get kind of without having to regrid, without having to replace our shape. But the stock chair actually, the way it's built, requires us to do this so that we get that perfect connection on the outsides.
Using my right side vertical alignment pins, crank that down. All right.
Yeah, and one thing to note here is when you're putting your clamps on, you kind of need to think about what way it's pulling your material. So in this case, these clamps are actually pulling away from the pins a little bit. So when you're tightening, you need to kind of hold that material against the pins and tighten, or flip the clamps to the other side. So that way they just naturally pull the material against the pins.
Yeah, definitely something to be conscious of.
I've definitely had it where, it's perfect, and then you go to tighten your clamps and it moves away, and then you get an offset.
Yeah. All right, in the same vein of the left side, I'm going to create a new grid just so I have a nice, good, clean visual of my stock over here on the right side. And I'm only doing one stretcher, but in the project you'd be doing all the stretchers using this process. So it makes a lot more sense setting up a nice solid left probe registration and then a nice solid right side. Z-touch directly off the top of my stock. And I move my support bar in for this process because I want origin to be nicely supported. And now I scooch it out before I start cutting. Okay, and same process.
Yeah, we should also mention that's an important step. Make sure you slide the support bar far enough away that when you're kind of offsetting, you don't run the bit into the support bar, because it can happen, and you just kind of have to be aware of how far away you are from the piece.
Are you speaking from experience here, Sean? Or?
I'm speaking from experience multiple times. Yeah, just note, put a little space in between there.
Nice. All right. Creating our grid. Again, doesn't matter what size it is, but we want to lower that bit behind the material and use the bottom end of that circle, or the bottom end of that bit. Say that again. All right, so again, we're using the back side of the material because of that reference face pressed firmly up against the clamping face, and it's going to help with our repeatability and any variations of material thickness. And there we go. We're going to use the same tenon file as well, but we're going to grab it instead of the top left. We're now using the top right anchor. 0, 0, snap it down, and we're ready to go. I'm going to throw my 1/4" cutter back in there. All right. So same process as before, same depth passes, same offset. Just in all joinery and in all inlays, we're cutting the positives first, i.e. the tenon, then moving to the mortise, the negative, i.e. the mortise. We're cutting the tenons to a 0-inch offset, so that is its true size. That way we can slightly adjust the mortise size and make it ever so slightly bigger to dial in that fit and get it to be a nice friction fit with a little bit of room for glue. I always like to take my hands off the tool when it is Z-touching, just so I don't influence it at all.
Well, and one of the nice things about the way Jake's doing this project here and the way we've set up the stock chair is typically you cut the tenons, then the mortises, because you can put an offset on the mortises until you get the right fit, and you can fit the tenon while you're cutting the mortises. A little harder when you're doing the tenon second, because you have to remove the tenon, put it in the mortise, make sure it goes back in to cut it. Because he's set up this back, left, and right grid for the tenons, he should be able to take any tenon later and do negative offsets on the tenon as well. So it gives you some flexibility on how you want to cut. Okay, so you can kind of see he's just, one of the key things I find here when you're doing your first pass is to make sure you have just enough of the bit on the outside of the corners, because if not, if you don't get enough, it'll kind of tear out on the backside, but if you're farther away, you'll kind of it won't tear out as often as what I found. So, Jake's kind of gotten the center of the bit running over the corner, and I find that's about where I have no problem with tear out on the back. So. Okay, so you see there, now we've done our full depth in 2 passes, and now we're just working our offset down as he goes. He can type in because he knows, but you can also times the offset by, a percent. So if you want to go 50% of the bit diameter, you can just times your offset by 0.5, and that'll give you, half the distance from the offset to the end. So that's kind of a nice way to think about it. I like to do about 50% when I'm doing this. More, and you start to really feeling a lot of tension as you're going around. Let the tool do the work for you. You don't need to muscle origin to get it to accomplish what you need to do. If you find that right balance, it's just kind of a easy, nice motion. And we've worked on the premium project, so the instructions tell you exactly where to cut the offsets to kind of get that nice thing. Premium projects are tested by us internally. We work on them. Really make the process nice of teachable moments, all the kind of tips and tricks. And then, by the time you get them, they're really thought out, and it should be kind of a joy to make.
Yeah. I will say when it comes to fitment and offsets, it does depend heavily on what kind of material you're using. I've even noticed that my proper offset for these mortise and tenons varies between white oak and walnut.
Yeah, I was going to say I did some box joints on plywood a long time ago, and what I noticed is the plywood needed a much bigger offset than hardwood, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Okay, and there we go. That is our final stretcher for the stock chair, and I have my tenons on both sides. Now we need to cut the mortises for it.
And even talking a little bit more about the project. Now we set these 2 up. When you're going to go cut 4 more, right? Or 3 more of these the same way without having to regrid, without having to set up a new thing. You're just going to take the other ones, do the same technique on all 4 stretchers.
Correct. So you're just going to be kind of batching it out, sitting there with a pile of stretchers next to you.
Now, Jake, maybe while we're there, do you want to quickly show before how to jump back and forth between the workspaces? Because people
Sure.
may have not known that feature. And as you're doing the stretchers, you got to remember if you're doing the left or the right. And that's why we spend all the time laying them out in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the scan menu on that right-hand side, go into our workspace, and it's all listed right here. So I didn't name this last one, but
Oh, Jake, you got to name your workspaces, buddy.
All right. That was our right side probe, right? So stock chair. Not stick chair. Another reason I want to put stock chair in the beginning of the title is it's going to help me later on down the road. I can just search stock chair, and every workspace related to stock chair is going to show up first. Right tenon. There you go.
Yeah, so Jake, maybe it's a good time to also show right now. So the top bar actually shows what workspaces are visible based on the tape. So when you're on a workstation, that tape is the same and it remembers all of them. So right now Jake has 48 workspaces associated with this workstation. So if he clicks the all button, that'll show every workspace that the tool's ever used. Visible filters out based on what the tool can currently see. So we see visible, that's the default. Now if you search for the name stock chair by hitting the little magnifying glass, and it'll kind of tell you how many matches there are while you're typing. So here we have 2 matches. He can hit done, and you don't even have to type the full thing out, just the part. And now you can see we have 2 workspaces that match stock chair. And this is a really nice way to organize your files, really making sure you have that identifier in front. So when you type stock chair, all of our workspaces are available to use even later. Because in this case, as long as we had the same size material and we worked it down, we could come back in a month or 2. We wouldn't have to regrid. We wouldn't have to replace our files. They're already kind of set up.
Yep. So that was the workspace that we just did previously with our Oh, actually, this is another one something I want to show on the screen. When you're doing tenons over and over and they're in the exact same space, you can get rid of this giant blue cut area that we've already done simply by tapping this little eraser up here. Yes, I want to erase, and now I can start fresh. It's very handy to make sure that you know exactly what you've cut thus far. And if you're doing things over and over again, clear up your workspace a little, keep it nice and tidy. Okay, on to the mortise. So this chair has one side of the leg has the long stretcher mortise, which is single mortise on one face, and the other side has a double mortise for the arm and the seat. Now, when it's laid out in this fashion, the marks for your mortises are actually on the underside of these pieces, the piece facing the table. Again, just to kind of help clarify when you're doing your markings in the beginning. I'm going to go to grab this back leg, that's leg E, and it has both a left side and a right side probe as well. All the legs do. So when you're setting up to do this project, you're going to have all your legs next to you, and you're going to cut all 4 files that use the left reference, and again, same thing with the tendons, all 4 files on the right reference face, or the right probe face, I should say. And that's because we have 2 X's, one on each face. And we're going to cut that one. So I have leg E. I'm going to start off with since we're already set up on the right side with the camera, I will do my right side probe first. A couple things I need to do to the workstation. I need to bring its clamping face up to its top position. I won't be needing a spoil board in this situation because I'm not cutting outside of my stock dimensions. And I also need to take off my support arms because we have a longer piece. Workstation allows for you to accommodate for a variety of lengths of pieces. So these support arms that hold the support bar can pop off with just a subtle turn with your wrench. And the clamping face. Great. I'm going to take these clamps out of their position that way, and now go straight down into the clamping face with them. It's also handy too because if anything were to fall, these clamps will catch them. And we are still going to be using our support bar as our zeroing face. One little trick though, because this piece is pretty lengthy, I need to slightly adjust this thumb tab over here just so that it doesn't run into my piece. It's okay, it still has a solid reference. I'm just backing it off just a little bit. There we go, it's right there. And I'm also going to bump in my vertical alignment pin. It's really nice to be able to just set up Workstation's clamping face exactly to what you need. Like right now I need to come all the way past here, so I have to get rid of that vertical alignment pin so I can just retract it into the clamping face. Yeah, and all the things that you'll need to adjust on the Workstation can all be done with the wrench that comes with it. Right there, it's just a screw that comes out and sneaks back in and sneaks up flush. I can also put this one down. All right. If at any point, yes, one more thing, given the dimension, the size of our stock, in this position, we're coming up in contact with that vertical alignment pin just fine. But when we flip it on its edge like this, we don't. So we need to extend our 90-degree surface that we can register off of. Well, you may have noticed in your tool bag that comes with Workstation, comes with an angle fence. It has multiple purposes. One, being able to precisely find and maintain your angles for cutting angled tenons, or just simply extending the vertical surface that we're registering against. So I'm going to keep that square nice and tight. Now we can press up against the top of that when we are in our more narrow position. All right. If at any point you're looking at your leg, you see your mortise marks, you're like, I just need a better understanding of what the file looks like. Go ahead and go into your files. Say I have leg E in my hand. Look for part E, RP versus LP. That's right probe versus left probe. And it will just give you a preview of what we're actually working with. My right probe is the wider face and the single mortise. So I'm going to start there. But I'll come back to that. I'm going to first chuck this up into my workstation. So, looking for my X, it's on that face, means that's going against the workstation with the mortise facing up. Firmly pressed against there, and the top surface, again, adjusting this tab if I need to, and clamping into place. Lightly clamp that one until I get this one into place. Everything feels good, and I can crank them down. Keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't move on you while you're cranking it down. All right, nice and flat, nice and level, and secure. Okay. Again, we're creating a new workspace, so we're going to hop into a new scan and set up a workspace for our right side probes. Hovering the tool, keeping it nice and steady and level, just so you can get a good image of the material. That's okay to let Origin hover off of the workspace if you're trying to get the bottom edge, just as long as you're doing your best to stay level with the top surface and steady. All right, got another kind of funky grid tactic here. There are these spaces in the workstation where we actually use the clamps, we slid the clamps down into. We're going to lower our probe into those to do the same type of grid that we did on the tenons, but now instead on the back side of the legs for the mortises. So grid, new grid. I'm going to find that on Origin's screen. I could also get a visual reference and just make sure I am indeed hovering over that, and lower down into it. Set my depth, adjust that, and press lightly against my material. Now I'm going to actually have to lift Origin gently to bring it over to the next hole and lower it down in. And finally lift one more time. Yes, and if I did wanted to bring the bit up instead of lifting the tool, I can always adjust the depth mid-grid, retract, and raise, and lower. But I'm happy with this, so I'm going to set the depth, lightly pressing the left side of the tool up against the process, and probe. So same deal, now I have that top right grid. And I can hop into import and grab my part E right probe, RP. Find that 0, 0 point, 0, 0, and place. All this for this little mortise down here. adjust my depth. So we're going to do again in 2 depth passes with an offset. Luckily the size, it doesn't require us to pocket anything, but we do want to give ourselves a 0.02 offset, just because we're going to be roughing down through the depths down to slightly deeper than the tenon. I want to give myself a little room for glue, so instead of 0.625, which is the tenon length, I'm going to do 0.64, just a little bit more. And Z-touch. Now I'm Z-touching.
Now, Jake, there's a quick question. I saw when you put the offset on that a little button showed up called Helix. Are you going to Helix this, or are you doing it the old-fashioned way?
I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, purely because my cut path does not fit entirely inside my corrective range. So like a circle, if I'm doing a bunch of pilot holes, I would absolutely use Helix, which allows the bit to spiral down and slowly and get deeper as with every single pass, and I just stay still. In this case, because I still have a little bit of movement required, I'm choosing to do it in 2 depth passes and then a finish pass. But it's nice to know that you could switch it on to Helix and do that process. Okay, 3 quick passes.
Yeah, so the actual origin part of this project is pretty fast. We're cutting a couple tenons, we're cutting a couple mortises. The milling process can take some time depending on how you source your material, especially if you're getting really rough material. Getting it surfaced flat, 90 can be quite a bit of work. Jake, I think, actually was having a little bit of trouble finding rough material for this, and actually found someone locally who did 3-sided surface material. So, it's 90 in both sides, and then the thickness on the top may be a little bit unflat. So we actually planed that down yesterday to the right thickness, but the bottom is jointed, the sides are jointed to that, and then you kind of have a top surface that you have to clean up. So you can speed that process up with your material selection if you have that options locally.
You want to, yep, there we go. My mortise is in its proper position. A couple things I'm going to do. Because I Z-touched off the top of my workstation, I just want to double check. I have my digital calipers here. I'm going to make sure that I'm at a 0.64 depth. Perfect. And I've only cut it to a 0-inch offset, which means these are essentially the same exact shape, which means they're not going to fit. But I always want to double check before I move on from there. Yeah, maybe if I wanted to mallet that in, but I don't. I want it to be a friction fit, so I'm going to move into the negative offset realm. Right here on offsets, just go ahead and throw a negative sign, 0.00. I'm going to go 3. So negative 0.03 of an inch bigger than the shape I have currently.
And while Jake's cutting this, if you're new to Sessions or new to Origin, put in the comments. Let us know if you don't own an Origin. Let us know if this is your first session. We're excited. We're here every Thursday, so you can always come see us again.
Okay, without moving my leg, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Perfect.
And this is kind of why we do the mortise second, right? Because we can leave that leg in there, fit the tenon. If we don't like it, we can just make it bigger. Now, obviously, we can't add material back to it if you go too big of an offset. So there's some trickiness there. So maybe, Jake, even talking, like, what do you see the negative offset normally being here?
Well, like I said, it depends on the material. The white oak needed a little bigger of an offset. The walnut is a little softer, so a smaller offset still gave me that nice friction fit. But typically 0.003, 0.005, that's the realm I'm working in. And I sneak up on it too. I wouldn't just immediately go from 0 to 0.005, because even that might be just a little beyond what I want that fit to feel like. I want it to make a popping noise when I pop it out, when I pull it apart. So that's my goal. I'm going to grab a little sandpaper to just get the fuzz. And then we're going to move on to the next.
Yeah, Jake, I love that little popping noise when you get it just right, and you can kind of sandwich some air in there, and when you pull it out, it just explodes.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite pleasurable.
And normally in this situation, I would keep running with my right side probe files the rest of my chair legs. But for the sake of speed and this session, we're going to move to the left side probe. Same process. Pop off your angle guide. Extend your left side vertical alignment pins.
And one of the things that's nice about the way we've set this project up is now that he kind of created that mortise with a leg on the right side, we still have to flip the leg to cut, so we can reuse that same gridding technique later, which is nice. And if we weren't, we're being a little specific about how we do this project. If we had put the angle guide and done the tenons with that, some may argue there's too many points of contact, and that's why we're using the 2 pins, because you really want those 2 points of contact. If you have a piece that's longer and it's touching, you may get the little variance of where it's actually touching. We could have kind of done the 2 first grids and then duplicated those workspaces, deleted our files out of them, and placed the other ones. But with this project, because of the thickness, we can't slide that in with the pins, so we had to do separate versions here.
All right. Again, I'm looking at my piece. I have my X marked on this face. So that means it is going against the clamping face. Firmly up, firmly over, clamp it into place. Try to go a little quicker. All right. Beautiful. This face has 2 mortises. I'm still creating a grid in the same fashion. I'm still going to start with a new scan. Again, setting up new workspaces, naming them. This would be stock chair left mortise. The one we just did would be right mortise. And that's so I could jump back to it at any point if I need to.
Yeah, and sometimes renaming it right after you scan will keep you from forgetting after the fact, when you're kind of in the middle of gridding or placing a file and you forget. You can always go rename later, but it means you're going to have to load that workspace, figure out which one you're working with, then rename it. This is kind of a nice thing to do right when you're doing it. So, and if you haven't seen the grid before, we actually, I think it was 1 update ago, we actually redid how the grid worked to add the ability to grid on others' faces. So now when you're doing grid, you can kind of think of any corner of a picture frame can be gridded, whether that's the inside or the outside. And then when you're placing files, you can kind of reference yourself from those different positions for whatever task you're doing. Previously in the software, you could only make grids in the bottom left, but we're connected to the internet. These updates can make the tool better, and the grid one was a pretty awesome one that
huge.
Came out not too long ago.
Yeah, it completely opened the world of gridding, and gridding on not necessarily edges, because you can adjust the height. You can grid in the middle of a floor, for example, by using the engraving bit, some hand-drawn lines to actually reference the real world, using engraving bit like a stylus, and just lower it down just above your material, above your floor or whatever it is that you're cutting, and use that kind of like a stylus to drop points and create a grid. Okay.
Yeah, and if you're doing that, you're actually looking under the bit, not on the screen when you do that. So you're looking at where the point of the engraving bit's touching the surface, not on screen. Just a little clarification there.
Yeah. If you hop over to my screen, just want to show, oops, I accidentally tapped one. So we just placed our Part E RP, which stands for right probe, and now we're moving over to our Part E LP, which you can see in the thumbnail image has 2 mortises, using our top left anchor point this time and snapping at 0, 0. Scooch over. All our mortises are perfectly spaced apart. They're just ready for us to cut. And same process. Go for it.
Yeah, and it's nice because you can see, that little circle that we put roughly where the mortise is going to be helps remind us that we're cutting in the right spot before we cut.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be dead on accurate. It's just to remind me, okay, there's going to be mortises on this face. 0.3. So I'm going to jump back and forth between this mortise and this one and cut them to, again, I'm going to double check, but I know that a negative 0.003 offset is going to fit my tenons that we just cut. So I'm confident in that. I'm still going to check once I get to 0 just to be sure.
While Jake's cutting this, for those of you who do have Origin, have you created a premium project yet? Which one did you do? How did it turn out? Let us know in the comments. We now have, I think, 4 or 5 different premium projects. Noah has one on there. We have another one from Jonas. Yeah, I mean, the candle one, like we said earlier, the candle holder is a free project. So try that one out to get a feel for how premium projects work. And, when you're finished, come to the forum, show us your pictures on Instagram. We want to see the things you're doing. One of the things that's really cool about these projects is, you can't actually sell the final goods or share the files, but you can modify the files for your own personal benefit. So we've seen some really cool projects recently where, someone took the lattice lamp and designed a new screen for it. And maybe Noah quickly can go to that camera. I think behind Jake, we actually have a picture of the lattice lamp. That's another premium project that Jonas, the same creator of this chair, did. You can see it here. It has like a kind of a cutout that you will build, and then one of the people in the forum, they actually redesigned a new one using the same techniques and replaced it. And so, you can modify these projects for your own personal needs, for gifts that you want to give someone. If you want to make this chair bigger, shorter, taller, you can do all that. All the files are there to modify for your personal benefit. So, make sure you let us know if you have built any of the projects. And we look forward to seeing some of the stock chairs show up online as well. All right, so Jake's finishing that one up. You can see now he's at a negative offset right now, finishing that last pass. When you're doing these, instead of changing your depth and offset each time, you go, don't cut one fully and then the other fully. Do each at the same pass, retract, move to the next one. That'll save you a couple passes as well. Cleaning up a little fuzz. If you're cutting with an upcut bit, you're actually kind of pulling the material up, right? The bit's kind of going through the wood and pulling up. So it's always nice to have a little piece of sandpaper around so you can clean that off and make sure the surface quality is what you're looking for, and do a little test fit.
All right. There it is. Very happy with that.
Nice.
Adjust this camera. Cool. Let's see if I can wiggle it out. Oh, did you hear that?
Oh, yeah. That was nice, Jake. Good thing we got new microphones. Okay, so one thing that's we should quickly go over here, which people may be wondering, why didn't we just do, one face, rotate it and do it again? And it actually comes down to the fact that, one of the sides, the rails are splitting it right down the middle, and the other side, it's actually offset onto one side. So maybe when Jake fits it in a second, he can show that. You can see that mortise there is actually not centered because you want the chair was designed in a way where all the outside faces are flush. So that's why we couldn't just rotate and cut again.
Correct. So,
but you could design your own chair that was, not that way, where maybe it's a square stock and then everything doesn't have to be referenced from other sides. You could modify this file. There's some cool things I think people will do once they run through this project, understand the processes.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and dry fit this. Just make sure everything is nice and the way I want it. Again, the reference faces should all face each other, so the X's should match up. And
oh yeah, Jake, I think we've actually stepped a little too far ahead of ourselves here. We forgot one really cool thing we were going to show in the session. And I know we're starting to get a little late, but maybe we should roll over to the jig for cutting the back on the miter saw before we fit it all up.
Absolutely. Yeah, so before we move on to the dry fit and the seat weaving, I do want to point out that this nifty little jig that comes with that you make for the project to cut this slightly bizarre angle on the back that creates a great backrest, but it's tricky to do without making a jig for it. So we've made a file for that. You use a hold down clamp to hold it into the jig, and then another hold down clamp to hold it to your miter saw, and do a shallow cut, creating that angle. There you go. So that angle, a couple of things about this. The distance of that angle is going to be the width of your backrest. And once we do our first glue up, we're going to take our final measurement of the width, and that's going to be the length of our backrest. When you're clamped up into this piece, and say, there's an engraved line that you line your saw blade to, but say the backrest isn't quite big enough. Just a subtle tap moving the jig towards the blade ever so subtly, and another cut. Even a little tap is actually going to make that backrest section quite a bit bigger. You're aiming for about 90 millimeters, but that was also the reason that we had you keep your backrest material slightly wide and didn't cut it down to its final dimension yet, so that once you have those both cut, you can measure them, figure out what you need your width to be, and cut it down. The only thing that you are going to do during the milling process is get this down to a 3/4 inch thickness versus everything else. So, and
yeah,
again,
just to mention, this is like a jig we made on Workstation. So you're actually going to put this MDF on Workstation, make a scan, the files included with Premium projects, and then we really built this because you're kind of making a cut that's a little difficult, and this actually makes it much safer and easier. So it's something you can quickly do on Workstation, and we're using kind of some of the files from the file to build it. So it's a kind of a cool little jig that you can learn to work with.
Another thing I want to point out, two things actually. One, again, the most important thing is consistency. So when you cut one side, when you cut one back leg, make sure not to move the jig. Very delicately take it out of its hold down clamp, replace it with the next one, and then cut the next leg, because you want those to be the same. So just take extra caution in that. And your little offcut, little angled piece, hold on to that. That's going to come in real handy later on down the road when we're gluing up and gluing the backrest on. We're going to use it as a clamp block to give us parallel clamping surfaces. Okay, I'm going to keep moving forward and dry assembling this chair, if that is all right with everybody.
Sounds good to me, buddy. And I think this is one of those projects where you're cutting a lot of pieces, and your references are very important, so you don't get kind of misalignment later. And so what ends up happening is, by labeling up front, when you just pick something up, it'll always be kind of easy to put together. And we have some kind of cool tricks in the projects of how to lay that out, how to think about it, and it's not just the same as doing standard woodworking, because we have the grids, we have the software files that are attached with it. So there's a little bit of thought there, but we've kind of solved that, and hopefully that can go into your other projects when you complete this one.
Couple of taps. Beautiful. and then my final long stretchers. Again, X faces facing out in this case because we're trying to line up with that front edge of the chair. And X facing out. Beautiful. Voila. There we go. We got a chair. Well, almost. Got a couple extra steps that need to be done. I haven't cut the back of this leg yet, so I would do that. But to move on to when you're doing the glue up, I recommend, and sort of the instructions, doing this glue up in a couple different sections. The gluing up the right and left side first, letting that come to a full dry, doing any necessary sanding at that point because it's a little easier to handle and get into spots. Then moving on to the second stage of the glue up and doing the long stretchers. While those are clamped up, you can do the backrest. And that's the moment that would be good to measure and cut your backrest to size. Grab that little wedge that we saved, use some double-sided tape, attach that to the back side of your leg, and it will give you a parallel clamping face to attach the backrest, like so.
Yeah, I liked when we were building this one. That was a great little trick about how to get it, because previously when you would clamp, it would kind of slide up and down, and you were kind of trying to get the glue right, but adding that little bit of thing there, it's really nice to get that done.
Yeah. All right. For that backrest glue up, I definitely recommend having some shorter F-style clamps, and then maybe a quick clamp handy, so that you can position it, especially if you're by yourself and you need an extra hand. You can kind of quickly position one side, fine-tune another, crank that one down with an F-style clamp, and then replace the other one with the same. All right. So now in the saga of this chair, we are glued up. We're ready for sanding and finishing. Before you weave, you want to get your finish on, because obviously you don't want to get finish all up in the nice nylon webbing that we're going to apply. And it's going to be a lot easier to access all the surfaces to sand them down. Break your edges with sandpaper, or use a trim router and a roundover bit or a chamfer bit to come through and give everything a nice round over to make it a little happier to the hands. There is a couple of tricks to this process. If you decide to use a trim router, you can't get all the way in to certain areas with a bearing bit. So it's going to require a little hand tuning after the fact. You can go through and touch every surface that you can reach, but know that at the end you're still going to have to come in with a sanding block and just round it out up to certain corners. Think about how you're going to interact with the chair as you're sitting into it, where your hand's going to touch, what might catch on the side as you walk by, and just focus on those areas, make them really human-friendly, hand-friendly, and have fun with it. Your backrest is a great opportunity to shape that so that it fits you. I use a hand plane to just really shape that bottom edge a little bit more so that it fit my back best. All right, and then as far as finish, if you've seen our what was it, Sean? Our Christmas or our holiday gift sessions, we talked about a lot about finishes. So I'm going to talk about my favorite finish again, Osmo.
Jake, here we go. This is Jake's moment of finish. Talking about finish, he has a huge affinity for finishes. So
just
let him
quickly,
have it, Jake.
Just quickly, you want to make this chair last. It's going to be the points of contact where your hands are going to go. People have greasy hands. You want to make sure it's well finished. So a penetrating oil, I like a hybrid oil wax, so something that penetrates like an oil and then kind of hardens and creates a nice top surface, like Osmo, like Rubio. So make sure this chair is protected so it can last longer than just necessarily leaving it unfinished. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. A short corner with Jake's finishing on this session.
Now, switching to our different material. This is our the white oak chair that we made with a 3 coats of the Osmo on it. I love the way it came out. I decided to round over every edge, and it feels really great to the hand. And I've gone ahead and I've done the first section of the weave. So the front to back weave. As you can see, there are 7 front to back straps, and I cut those. I measured that length and I cut those all at once. I sealed the edges. I actually just lit a candle and just like lightly passed that nylon webbing over it just to kind of seal up the edges. Not catching it on fire, being very careful, and doing it in a well ventilated area. You just want to kind of seal those edges and stop them from fraying. But I want to talk about the next side, the weave. Is it this side that I marked? No. So for the front to back, really, all we're doing is we got a center mark because we got an odd number going this way. So you're going to want to measure from the inside of the chair, give yourself a light center mark on the inside of the chair, and that's where your first strap is going to go. From there, I just did it visually. Everyone's going to get different webbing, different sizes, different materials. It's really up to you. I'm using a 2-inch wide nylon webbing. So I decided to go center, and then from there I just went about a 1/4 inch in from either edge, and then just evenly spaced these two. For the attachment method, I use some nice beefy staples in a staple gun. Some really long ones. Now, those in combination with some pressure behind the staple gun is a really nice hold. I threw 2 staples in each one and then hit them with a little bit of Sharpie actually, so they're not so bright and silver, and it helped it blend a little bit better, but it's a nice strong hold. Do one side of the webbing, or staple one side of the webbing, loop it around, pull it as tight as you can, use quick grips or anything to hold it into place, and then staple that second time. You want to go as tight as you can now because things are going to stretch out over time. And it's okay, that's just how fabric seats and webbing seats go. If you ever need to reupholster it, you can just pop those staples out and put in some new webbing. But let's focus on the side-to-side weave. We have an even number. So I don't have that center mark. So what I did was I grabbed my webbing and I just laid it out to visually see, and then measured roughly 11/16 between each strip. It's a kind of a funky number, but that's how it shakes out. And I put little tiny tick marks on the inside that I'm going to line the edges of my strap to. But really it comes down to visual. So I'm going to strap one side all the way across, and that's when we weave it through. Start on the outside, work your way in, just trying to get consistent spacing. You'll notice that I started off with navy blue and I'm now doing a black. That's by choice. It's going to give me a checker pattern seat. I think it's going to look really cool, especially with the rich warmth of the white oak, little navy blue and black webbing. So let's throw some staples in.
Yeah, and one thing to, I think Jake touched on a little bit, but the tautness of this seat actually really changes how the seat behaves, and you really, the fabric is going to stretch over time. So, you really want a little bit more, tightness to start because it is going to get more saggy. If you do end up not getting them tight enough, pull the staples with pliers. tighten it on one side and then staple it down. I also found, even when I had it super tight, I had to come back maybe a little bit later, and I wanted it to get a little more tight. It really just depends. As you build the seat and get used to it, you're going to decide whether you like a more comfortable, like saggy seat or a really taut seat.
Yeah. The reality is too is we're using a staple gun and we're going into really dense hardwood. So I know it's seating well, but I'm going to come back in with a hammer just to flush those out and drive them the rest of the way. And from there, just spacing, again, about 11/16 in between each one. Bada bing. Bada boom.
The other cool thing is while you're building this, you can decide, hey, I want more or less. We give you kind of instructions on how much we think and how much, the creator liked, but, you're building it your way. If you want to add more in, do a little bit of math, figure out how many you can get in there. If you want to do less, that's up to you, based on the look you're going for.
Yeah. I'm just going to do one more, this last one here, and then I'm going to start weaving to show you guys the next side. All right, flip it over. Bring these over. Now you're going to establish your weave pattern. So this first one, we're going over, under, over, under. And back down underneath. For the one directly next to it, under, over, under, over. And I really like the texture and the feeling of nylon webbing, but kind of the beauty of this chair is it's just a great platform to do whatever kind of seat you want. So if you want to dabble in the world of Danish cord, it's a great frame to do Danish cord on. And if anyone ever does that, please let me know or post it in the community because I would love to see that.
Yeah, you could even think about doing wooden slat if you wanted to make it more of an outdoor chair by milling a few more holes along the stretchers. There's a lot of modifications that you can do to these projects, and I think as you work through them, you may build one and decide, hey, I'd actually like to do this, and then you build the next one, and as you build them, you're going to get faster. And yeah, Jake's built a couple this week. Pretty exciting to see him. Different types of wood, different types of colors. I'm liking the walnut frame, I think.
Yeah, me too. I'm gonna go in with like an emerald green, dark green webbing on that one.
Oh, that'll be nice.
So first thing what I'm doing to get that tension or to help with that tension is up here at the top. I'm pulling down as hard as I can. I'm making sure that's flat. And I'm gonna use a quick grip to just soak up some of that tension, hold it there. That way I can pull through the bottom and loop around. To get my next staples in. Boom. All right. I just want to see what that looks like. Gorgeous. I'm very happy with that.
Noah, maybe we can see a top-down shot from here, how the colors are showing. Yeah, I like the multicolor. It's pretty nice. I did single blue on mine, and I think might be pulling some staples out.
Right on. Cool. Well, we could.
And one thing Jake's doing here is, and I did this when I was building. I actually did one at a time and stapled the far end as well, and I accidentally weaved one the opposite way, and I had already stapled the other side. So doing it this way allows you to make sure the weave is correct before you put the final piece in.
Exactly. Yeah, I am very excited about that. And when you're moving the chair around like this, just be cautious. Put something soft down, or just be very careful, because you just put so much hard work into finishing it and sanding it. You don't want to ding a corner accidentally. So treat it well. And shall I keep going? Should I just apply this whole seat? How are we doing on time?
Yeah,
Cool.
I think we're doing pretty good. I don't think we need to finish it. Let everybody when they build their own get that final moment of it coming together. I think that's kind of a really nice moment when you can sit down in it and relax for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hope this helped and gives you a couple tips while you're building it. But yeah, check out the project. It's on Shaper Hub. Search for the stock chair or just look in the list of projects. And
as always, this is Shaper Sessions. I'm Jake. That's Sean. Thank you for joining us very much, and we'll see you next time.